Good morning, everyone. My name is Heidi Potter, and I'm Chief Executive of Japan Society, and delighted to see you all here today, and delighted to welcome John Lander to the Japan Society. John is a freelance author and photographer based near Kamakura, and Japan has been his home for nearly 40 years. When he's not at home or in the middle of a pandemic, he's often out and about on photography assignments at local events, festival, or his main passion, Japanese gardens. In fact, Japanese garden aficionados may have seen his beautiful photographs on the annual Gardens of the Spirit calendar. Having lived near Shikoku myself and traveled randomly to a few of the pilgrimage temples, I was particularly pleased to hear about John's new book, The Shikoku Pilgrimage, Japan's Sacred Trail, which will come out in the UK in late October. And that feeling of nostalgia and wanderlust has only been heightened after 18 months of not being able to travel to Japan. On a fairly grey South London Saturday, I'm really looking forward to traveling vicariously with John this morning. But let's move straight on now and join me in welcoming you, John, to the Japan Society. Thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the nice introduction. Yes, I've been in Japan a long time. At this point, I've lived here longer than in California. In fact, I don't even remember what it feels like to be American anymore. Anyway, let me get started, and then we can go over anything I miss in the question and answers. So, I just completed the entire pilgrimage myself last year at some peril, but I had to get it done, and the editors wanted more pictures of people and pilgrims themselves, which was there weren't so many out and about except for a few Japanese and very, very few foreigners, because people aren't allowed to enter Japan unless you're a Japanese citizen or a resident of Japan at this point. They're talking about loosening it a bit, though. There's more and more loosening going on, so there is hope for next year. But it's not only hikers and outdoorsy camper type people who like this. Fundamentally, it's a religious pilgrimage following in the footsteps of Kōbō Daishi, who's kind of a saint in Japan, a Buddhist sort of saint. There's Kōbō Daishi on the left. I don't think I put the map here, but the total length of the trail, it takes most people around 6 weeks to complete the journey, with many, many stops along the way. There's 88 temples altogether, and it takes 6 weeks if you're fit. But I've met people along the trail who just didn't make it. Their ankles gave out, or too many blisters, or their knees gave out. Especially elderly people, they just can't hack it. And I'm almost 70, so I had to use motorbikes, bicycles, buses, taxis, car rentals, and a good bit on foot. That's inevitable. Even if you take public transportation or motorcycles, you're still going to have to walk a lot. In any case, if you're a walking pilgrim, it takes 6 weeks minimum. And if you linger and stop and smell the roses along the way, which is kind of recommended, really, because some people treat it like a sprint or something, and I never feel that that's good, because Shikoku is a very nice place, and it's very rural and friendly, and stopping along the way is for me the joyful part of it, and not just rushing from temple to temple. If you haven't done it, and if it's on your bucket list, I really recommend taking as much time as a person can manage to enjoy it and smell the roses along the way, because there's a lot of good stuff along the way. So it's devoted to Kōbō Daishi, the guy on the left. The one on the right is Gyoki, who's the other Buddhist priest who established quite a few of the temples along the way. But for some reason, Kōbō Daishi, this guy the one on the left, gets most of the credit. And he was born in Shikoku and Temple 75 is his hometown, so that's kind of a big deal. What's Zensuji Temple? It's one of the biggest. They have temple lodging and lots and lots of pilgrims coming and going there. Anyway, we'll get to Zensuji later. For me, and for I think a lot of pilgrims or Henro, especially foreign ones, the whole concept of the entire trip is this concept of o-settai. And o-settai in Japanese means basically just hospitality or charitable giving. And the o-settai thing is very touching because people will rush up to you, and if you're wearing your white vest, Henro vest, that identifies you as a pilgrim, they'll come up and give you a bottle of water, a little bag of oranges, even money. I've had elderly women come up to me with 1,000 yen and just stick it in my hand and wish you good luck on your way. And in today's cold, cruel world, it's sort of nice to have people looking out for you and sort of making sure you've got plenty of water and you're hydrated and you have enough money to keep going. It's very touching to have people look out for you, even during the pandemic, and people are sort of shy away from strangers, but still people would come up and help you. And if they didn't want to have any contact, people would leave things behind in these so-called Henro huts, or the huts along the way where people can stop and rest. Sometimes you find bags of oranges in there, cases of bottles of water. Please take them for free. It's a great concept. Here's a picture of the o-settai.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this was I forgot the number of the time, Jizo-ji. And the whole community turned out to serve us coffee and give us snacks and coffee, which is these things are often community events. So, and sometimes you find these huts. Well, there's a lot of huts are all around, and they're not always convenient to the temple, but they're placed for the sake of pilgrims so that they can have a rest. And it's very much frowned upon to camp inside them, though, unless it's maybe in a very rural area like this where there's no neighbors around. And even so, you should go to the nearby neighbors and ask if it's okay if you stay overnight. It's kind of a contentious issue. So. And the urban ones, definitely you shouldn't stay there overnight. The people will call the cops. It's kind of an issue down there. So, especially nowadays. The trails are pretty well marked, and these community organizers and volunteers, unlike the Spanish Compostela thing, the Shikoku Pilgrimage is not subsidized by the government. It's not helped by UNESCO or anything. It's all of what there is pure giving and community service and volunteerism, which makes it nice in a certain way because there's nobody bossing you around, imposing their will on the trail, but at the same time, they could use a lot of help. And a lot of pilgrims don't understand that all of this is given freely by local volunteers and community groups. It's not the government or anybody bankrolling it. And so sometimes people abuse the hospitality a bit. So that's another thing people should be aware of. Pilgrims, they come in all shapes and sizes and stripes and various different motivations for doing this. A lot of times it's a life-changing event. People retire and they've always wanted to do this, or they've changed jobs and they have a couple months gap in between jobs or something, and they want to sort of sort themselves out for the next leg in life or their next step. But I suppose sometimes also there's kind of a traumatic experience. People want to sort themselves out, before they move on. Sometimes I've heard stories about that, but I would say that most people that I've met are doing it just because the elderly American guy on the right, he lives down there, and for him it's kind of a hobby. It's his life's. He's very much interested in the Chicago. He volunteers, and he's one of the big wheels on the Facebook group, and they give all sorts of good advice about which huts should not be camped out in because the neighbors don't like it, or which temples are no longer offering lodging because of the pandemic, and which ones are open and which ones are not. All sorts of practical information. And the lady on the left, I met her walking up the hill. She was walking up and I was walking down, and she was with her pilgrim friends from Kochi. She also lives in Shikoku, and she has done it. She was in progress of doing it. She's like me. She just does it in bits and pieces as she had time for. And many people do it that way, especially if people live in Japan. They have the freedom to do one prefecture at a time, and then go back home, back to work, or whatever their responsibilities are, and then they come back again later in the year. The best times of the year, by the way, are springtime, April and May, or autumn, October, November. September is often typhoon season in Japan, so the weather is really changeable. October can also be that way, but the weather is cooler and much more pleasant for walking. Same with April, with springtime. Winter would be very, very difficult in my view. And summer in Japan, if a person's never been to Japan in the summertime, people may not realize, but it's really hot and humid here. It's like Thailand or the Philippines or something during summer. It's hot and humid. And if you're going to walk 20 or 30 kilometers a day, it would just be really unpleasant. So that's why you see most of the pilgrims out there in spring or autumn. At the moment, very few temples have temple lodging open to visitors because of the pandemic, but a few of them may have limited facilities, but in general, don't count on it. This particular temple was in Koyasan. It's the very end of the trail, which is not. I'll talk about Koyasan later, and it's rare to get Shojin Ryori, which is a vegetarian temple cuisine, but that's very much part of the deal at these temple stays. Not so much in Shikoku, though. I think only a couple of the temples that do temple stays have vegetarian temple cuisine down there. It's fairly uncommon in Shikoku. It's very much de rigueur at Koyasan, though. And Kyoto too, but Koyasan, I think all the temples that host visitors have temple cuisine. In fact, it's almost obligatory. You in the reservation, you almost always have to opt for the dinner. You can't opt out in most cases. Anyway, it's beautiful and it's beautifully arranged and it's very healthy, but it's not exactly filling. The temple gear, a lot of people don't bother so much with the sash, the thing in the middle, or even the sedge hat. But the vest is very, very useful because it identifies you to other pilgrims, and it identifies you to local people who might want to give you some water or just help point you, give you directions or something. It's very useful. And they make a great souvenir, once you're finally done with it. And I know people who have done the trail of the pilgrimage on several occasions, and they just keep their vest for the next round. Some people even do it in reverse. Protocol. Okay, this is a little bit lengthy, so I'll try to make it as as briefly as possible. So the first thing people they go to the main gate and bow once, and then a wash basin. There was a picture earlier of a wash basin, and you rinse out your mouth and wash your hands, and then there will be a bell tower. Almost every temple will have a bell tower, and you ring the bell once. Name slips, they're kind of like a calling card, and you put your name, address, date, and your wish, and you put these in a box in the main hall. And also people give them back when people give you water or o-settai or hospitality along the trail. It's also customary to give them one of these name slips as well, as a kind of thank you, and sort of let them know who you are. The one in the middle is very fancy. The woman who wrote the introduction of it gave me that one. And then finally, did I show the books? The book seal is the gentleman on the right. He's filling in the calligraphy in your book. And these pilgrimage books have seal stamp. Each page is devoted to one of the 88 temples, and they're all marked. And sometimes the calligraphy is quite beautiful, and the seals and the stamps that they put them. And these seal books or stamp books become sort of precious items for most pilgrims, that some people are even buried with them. You have to pay 300 yen a pop to have it filled out, but most people feel it's sort of worth it. And they do that. It's at the end before they exit the temple. And then you exit the main gate and bow once. And then on to the next temple. That's kind of, sometimes people linger around. Some of these temples have little lounge areas with benches and a table, so you can have your lunch or have a little sit down and a rest or something. And you can make friends with other pilgrims, and sometimes carry on to the next temple with them, or you may meet them later, or share travel information with your pilgrim mates. It's a very friendly situation. So we divided the book into 5 different sections, besides 6 actually. The introductory part, which I've been just talking about, the protocols of the trail, o-settai, and how long the trail is. There's a map in there, and detailed of where the temples are on the map. All of that is in the introduction. And then we broke it up into 4 different prefectures. And Tokushima is the first prefecture. Besides all the temples, it's famous for certain things. There's a scarecrow village way up in the mountains, which is sort of an almost abandoned village up in the mountains of Tokushima. And the elderly locals have built constructed these kind of so-called scarecrows, and it's become kind of a tourist attraction to bring people in. And a lot of these rural areas that have suffered from urban flight, little islands in the inland sea, mountainous areas like this, all the young people have gone away because there's no jobs. So they're trying very hard to attract people to come in, and so the young people will stick around and open a coffee shop or an Airbnb or something. And to some extent, I think it's working, especially the inland sea islands. And then on the right is the Awa Odori dance, which is famous in Tokushima. The last couple of years it has been canceled, but this is such a big deal every summer in Tokushima that it has spread all over Japan. So this kind of dance and hat and clothing it's found all over Japan during the summer. So the first temple here is Ryozen-ji, and it has a lovely garden. And right next door to Ryozen-ji are a couple of shops that sell handrobe gear. You can get your jackets and your sedge hats and your staff and bells, everything. I don't think they have guidebooks, but they have, I think they have guidebooks in Japanese and maps, but Ryozen-ji has a lovely lantern array inside. And it's being temple number 1, it's kind of an important spot along the trail. It's not only is it the first stop on the trail, but after completing all the 88 of the temples, people don't feel like they've completed the journey until they've gone back to temple 1. So it's quite animated place. There's people coming and starting off their journey and ending up their journey there. Second one was Konsen-ji. As you can see, a lot of times, if a temple doesn't have a garden, usually, or particularly interesting architecture, usually I'm not that engaged. So that's why you will see lots of Japanese gardens here, because that's my thing. This was a particularly unusual one. Also, we're still in Tokushima. Jizo-ji, and the Jizo-ji's got a rakan. These are called, a lot of people think fat Buddha or something is Buddha, but in fact it's not. It's Buddha's disciples, and these are all Buddhist disciples. In fact, that temple is even called Raken-ji. Raken is a Buddhist disciple, but the real name of it is Jizo-ji, but people around there call it Raken-ji. And it was worth it just for the disciples hall. And Byodo-ji. Byodo-ji is particularly nice architecturally, and I was taken by the fresco on the ceiling. Yeah, Tokushima's the start of the trail, and it's quite nice, but I think my heart lies in Kochi, or maybe Ehime, which is Kochi's the next prefecture. And it's starting to get wild and woolly down. Tokushima's fairly well developed. So whereas Kochi, getting down to the very tip of Misaki Peninsula, Moroto Peninsula it's a real long and difficult trek. And there's a few temples on the way, which I've skipped over. I'm not including them all in this presentation. They're all in the book, though, all 88 of them, plus Koya-san at the very end. And we devoted full-page spreads to the more photogenic temples and the more photogenic spots. This is part of the introduction to Kochi Prefecture. Another one of the attractions in Kochi Prefecture is the, what's the name of it? Garden. Makino Botanical Garden. It's right next to Chikurin-j, which is one of the nicest, or for me, it's one of the most well-kept and sumptuous temples along the trail, right in Kochi City. But Makino Botanical Gardens is right next door to it. In fact, the garden was once part of the temple grounds, and they're kind of almost a set because they're right next door to each other. So it's kind of not to be missed. That's why I say stop and smell the roses, because there's lots of good stuff along the trail besides temples. To me, the Moroto Peninsula is wild and woolly, and even though it's very difficult to get to, it's well worth it. This was one of my very favorites, was Konomine-ji. It's further along. I don't know why they're in this order, because Chikurin-ji is right after Makino. It's right back in Kochi City, right next to the Botanical Garden. And it has a fabulous vertical garden behind the main temple. But Konomine-ji was probably my favorite because of its exotic garden going up the hill, and it's very difficult to get up here. But one of the things I learned was the more inaccessible and difficult the temple to get to is sometimes an indicator of how fantastic it's going to be. So it's usually worth it to persevere and keep trying, keep going. And once you get there, it's usually worth it. And when I say difficult to get there, it usually means uphill. And this one's very much uphill, but I was really taken by the shrub garden going up the steps. This was at Zenzubuji, also very near Chikurin-ji. This was one of my favorites because it's on a tiny little island outside of Kochi City, and nowadays there's a causeway linking the mainland to the tiny little island. But in the old days, people had to take a little boat across there to this tiny little island, but it was very mossy and very rural, very countryside and very friendly. Okay, this is the other peninsula heading south from Kochi Prefecture, and very difficult to get to. In fact, it took me 4 trips to Shikoku and Kochi to finally get there. The roads are terrible. It's very, very difficult. People who have walked it tell me the road is it's dangerous to walk along the road because it's so narrow. It's really difficult to get there. And anyway, I finally made it. But as you could see, it was worth it with this reflecting pond and this rock garden all surrounding it. Is really amazing. The name of this was Kongofuku-ji Temple 38 at the very tip of Ashizuri Peninsula, which is famous in Japan. It's kind of a bellwether for typhoons and hurricanes. Once it hits that peninsula, you know you're in trouble because it's kind of a bellwether for the rest of Shikoku for weather-wise. And then further north in Kochi is Enko-ji. I was taken by the pond and carp garden out next to it, but it has some interesting sculptures on its grounds as well. The next prefecture would be Ehime, which is going further north from Kochi, and it's fairly well developed and rather pleasant town, Matsuyama, with its clunky little streetcars going around. This is the first place I ever went in Shikoku, and I kind of fell in love with the place. Plus, I learned that people take naps there, something that Tokyo people would never dream of doing. I walked into a noodle shop. I was too early for the ferry boat going back to Hiroshima, and I got there an hour and a half early, and I thought, okay, I'll have some noodles before the ferry leaves. And everybody in the noodle joint was asleep. Even the cook and the waitress, they're all laid out having a nap. And at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I couldn't believe it. And they all got up and they were very apologetic and fixed my noodles, but I wasn't upset at all. I thought it was great, and because I like taking naps, so I thought I like these people. They take a nap, and that's just normal for them. Tokyo people would never dream of doing that. So that was the beginning of my love affair with Shikoku. Plus, what got me down there originally was not the pilgrimage, but there's a famous travel book called The Inland Sea, written by Donald Ritchie, and he travels all around these little islands between Shikoku and Honshu, the main island of Japan. There's hundreds of little tiny islands, and nowadays a lot of them are uninhabited. People just gave up the ghost. But during Ritchie's first trip down there were still lots of little local ferry boats poking around the inland sea, and he stopped in all these places and camped out and stayed in the local schoolmaster's extra room or wherever he could find to stay. And he chronicles his trip down to the inland sea and how different it was from his life in Tokyo. So from that moment on, I was in. I got to go down there, and I did a couple articles for some magazines on the inland sea. So that was the beginning of my love affair with Shikoku before the pilgrimage. Okay, in Ehime, there's quite a few magnificent temples. This is rather hard to get to, but not terribly hard. Iwaya-ji, which is again up, but it has a little cave perch up here where people can meditate, and it's sort of, I think people think of it as a cave temple, but. And then there's nearby is Jizo-ji with its huge like lotus pond. The temple itself was a little bit dilapidated, but the lotus pond was magnificent. In Matsuyama City itself is one of the main temples at Ishiteji. It's really important, and it goes on and on and on. There must be 10 or 20 buildings in there, including a pagoda, a stone garden. It's got it all. It's a little bit dilapidated, but it's really busy and very important. And right in town, the streetcar goes out near there, so it's easy to get to. Taisan-ji has a interesting, this is outside of Matsuyama City and also at Ehime Prefecture, a heaven and hell mural inside the gate, which is kind of evocative. I think we're looking at the hell part. Maegami-ji, Temple 64. We're moving right along here through Ehime, sort of along the inland sea. This one has people think it has kind of more Shinto shrine architecture than Buddhist temple architecture, but I was sort of taken by the entrance hallways or corridors. Kagawa, and Kagawa in the main city is Takamatsu, which is probably the most modern and, I don't know, westernized and modern city in Shikoku, partly because there's a lot of little offshore islands nearby. This is actually on a peninsula of an island inside the inland sea. This is called Angel Road, this block of sand here. Anyway, Kagawa has lots of little islands, and in recent years they become depopulated because of urban flight. So the locals have set up this art festival. I think they call it a triennial. It happens every 3 years when there's international artists. They set up these artworks on these islands to attract people from all around the world. It's a big deal now. It's world-class kind of art event that happens every 3 years. I think they call it the triennial. And they set up these art installations on these tiny little islands offshore mostly from Takamatsu. And so the locals stick around and they open up guest houses and little galleries and restaurants and cafes and noodle shops, and it keeps them from moving on to Osaka and Tokyo to depopulate the islands. So it's been pretty much a success. Plus, these islands are lovely. I love to go out there. The other big attraction in Takamatsu and Kagawa Prefecture is Ritsurin Garden in Takamatsu. There are 3 so-called top gardens of Japan, and this is not one of them, but this is almost every year. It's #1 people's choice. The top 3 gardens of Japan are, except for one of them, to me, they are listed that way for historical reasons, not because of aesthetic reasons or gardening aficionado reasons. They're listed because of historical reasons or maybe a sympathy vote. I'm not sure what to say, but Ritsurin is one of the best. Right in Takamatsu, the streetcar goes right to it. So Kagawa and Takamatsu is much more developed with transportation, faster trains, more trains, buses that go everywhere, streetcars, and ferry boats going everywhere. This particular temple and garden shares a space with the temple next door. What's the name of it? Jinne-in and Kannon-ji. They're right next door to each other. In fact, it would seem it's the same compound. Jinne-in has a very nice garden behind it that nobody ever seems to look at. It was completely ignored. I was the only one there. People are busy doing other things, but unaware, I think, that there was this fabulous garden behind it. And Jinne-in has this incredible tree stump leading up to by the stairs leading up to the main part of the temple. Another cave temple, this one would be Iwaya-ji, also difficult to get to, way up in the mountains. Temple 75, this is where Kōbō Daishi was born around here. And this is a huge hub for the pilgrimage itself. I think they have a headquarters office there, pagoda. They have a huge temple stay building, kind of a hotel type building. I don't know if it's open at the moment, but when I stayed there a couple nights, and the place was really bustling with people, busloads of bus type pilgrims, which I didn't talk about too much because they're not that. Usually it's elderly people on a group tour, and it has its place. But anyway, we're in Kagawa-ken, and we're sort of getting closer to the end of the main pilgrimage. And what's the name of this one? Gosho-ji, outside of Gosho-ji. It's also quite nice temple with a giant pond garden. Shiromine-ji is a little bit difficult to get to, but worth it for its stone garden on the right to me. Jizo-ji, again, I've met pilgrims who weren't enthusiastic about this particular temple, and this was one of my favorites. So it all depends on a person's personal experience. I was aware of this Zen garden in the back of the temple for some time. It had been on my list just for the sake of its garden. In fact, the first time I went there was for the garden itself, not for the pilgrimage. And so, but nobody was there back there. There were like 20 or 30 people were milling around the temple and the temple bell and the main temple, but nobody was back here at all except for me and my companion. And then out front was on the day I was there was the day that they were doing the community o-settai thing, giving out free coffee and snacks to visitors and free water. And so I had a very, very positive experience with this temple. But I've met pilgrims who thought, it wasn't their favorite at all. But to me, it has personal memories. So I think every temple has a personal memory for every pilgrim, and for me this was one of them. Ones that were particularly nice to me, or someone was particularly kind or gave me directions or a free bottle of water. You tend to have fond feelings toward that particular place. And ones that are crowded with bus loads of tourists you may not like so much. So I think it all depends on a person's personal experience. And for me, Jizo-ji was great. This is Temple 88, the last one on the entire pilgrimage, if you don't count going back to temple number 1, and then Koya-san at the very end. This is Okubo-ji, way up in the hills, but most people are quite happy to bear with it because it's the end of the line pretty much. And people tend to leave their hiking sticks or staffs behind here as a kind of memory and a memorial. I think they burn them once a year at a kind of ceremony. finally, once a person has completed all 88 temples, gone back to temple number 1, most serious pilgrims don't feel like they've really finished the entire pilgrimage until they've gone up to Koyasan, which is not even in Shikoku. It's closer to Osaka in Wakayama Prefecture. Koyasan it has many temples and monasteries, and almost all of them offer temple stays with obligatory temple cuisine thrown in. It's not cheap, but a lot of foreigners are taken by the experience. The main attraction at Koyasan itself is the whole town, the whole village is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But the main thing here is the Okunomine cemetery, where Kōbō Daishi is buried. And that's why it's such a big deal for pilgrims, because that's where Kōbō Daishi is buried. And I've had friends who've gone into the cemetery at night, and they said it's really an experience, because it's sort of, a lot of it's lit up, especially the candles for Kōbō Daishi. And they said I really missed the boat by not going at night, but I was exhausted. Anyway, this is daytime pictures of the cemetery. And the temple where I stayed, Enko-in, it's popular with foreigners because the monks speak English there. And you can opt out of the evening meal and save a few pennies. And they have a fire ceremony in the morning. I think it's at 5 o'clock, and people are welcome to participate in the fire ceremony and even take pictures of it. They're very cool about they're tuned into foreign visitors and pilgrims and all kinds of people, and anything. They're pretty relaxed about all of that. So Koyasan is pretty much the end of the line, but it's worth it to do the full 9 yards. And most pilgrims will feel that it's worth going the extra mile, as it were, to do Koyasan at the very end. So this is I've kind of abbreviated the temples and the attractions to squeeze it into a 40 or 45-minute presentation, but all of the temples are listed in the book itself.
Thank you, John. There's a lot of people, I think, are already planning their next trip, and starting. There are people who've done other pilgrimages like Santiago de Compostela are now thinking that they'd like to try this one. So we will need to work out how to get into Japan, and also to carve out 6 weeks of our lives that we can so we can do the pilgrimage. But somebody was asking about restrictions on photographing in the temples. Are there, and there was a bit of chit chat in the chat about it, people saying there are signs up when you can't take photographs, but can you talk a little bit about when you're allowed and not allowed to take photographs?
Usually not inside the temple, and occasionally some temples don't like you to photograph anything, but usually the main gate, usually it's out on the street. That's public property, and a lot of temples in Japan, especially in Kyoto, they're getting more and more picky about that. Mm-hmm. Shikoku seems to be a lot more relaxed in this department, which was very helpful for me. In Kyoto, I've had obstacles and difficulties with that in recent years, because a lot of people are really into it, but they bring tripods and they slow up traffic and everything. At the moment, I think they're very eager for anybody to come visit, but the past 5 years ago, it was just overrun with tourism, and the locals were getting upset with having any tourists around. Now I think they're begging for it. But yeah, in most cases, outside the main temple is okay. Sometimes there's sacred stuff inside the temple that they don't want you to photograph, or they don't want you to mess with it.
Excuse me, one question from Bulgarian. Beautiful book. Congratulations, John.
Thank you.
I
Thank
wish
you.
you a lot of success because I think it's necessary this success for you, because from my opinion, this will be also a big successful for the local communities on Shikoku, especially after this pandemic. Because many people's, I did it, by the way, Shikoku in 2019. It was beautiful, amazing people, very warm people, very friendly people. But many of them, yes, many of them, they're owners of ryokans or guest house, and in this time, it's very difficult for them.
They're
And
suffering.
I think, John, that your book will be very good to make popular this pilgrimage, because
I
it's
hope
really
so.
amazing just to touch to another culture, another religion. So my question, John, is very simple. How many pages, please?
I think it's 240.
And all of them are cover?
Yeah.
Cover picture, and also the cover, it's a hard cover.
They classify it as soft, but it's kind of I'd say it's more like cardboard, but it's not super soft. It's a little bit thick. It's fairly tough.
Nice. Thanks, John. I already placed my pre-order. Good luck.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
And John, Janice is asking, how difficult is the terrain? Because it goes around the coast of Shikoku, right? So not the mountains in the middle on the whole, but how is the terrain?
Mountains. There are pleasant walks along the beach, and then plunges up deep into the mountainside. It goes inland through mountains, back down to the ocean. It zigzags all over the place. So there's all kinds of terrain. Some of the trails are quite pleasant through bamboo groves and all of that. And that can be quite pleasant, like the front cover. I think you saw that, she posed for me in a bamboo grove trail. And that was great. But a lot of it is walking along horrible highways with trucks blasting past you, and a lot of pilgrims complain about that. So there's all sorts of terrain, and walking up 3 kilometers up to the top of a very steep hill can be very, very taxing, especially if you're not really fit. If a person's very fit, no problem.
Also, looking at some of your photographs reminds me just how many steps there are actually even within the temples. Yes.
Even if you take a motorcycle or something like I did most of the time, you can't park even at the foot of the steps. The parking lot is another 200 meters down. So you have to walk up steps to the main steps and then go up another 100 steps to get to the main temple. So there's always going to be walking involved, no matter what.
We're hoping to come next year, a restrictions meeting with my local Buddhist center. And we only have about 2 weeks to do this. So would you recommend particular temples or a particular prefecture?
Yeah, I'd stick to one prefecture. I think you can do quite a lot in one prefecture. It depends on, Takamatsu, Takamatsu has an airport. So does Matsuyama and Koji. And all 4 of the prefectural capitals have an airport. So you can fly straight in from Osaka or Tokyo and get the show on the road. But I'd say the terrain in Kagawa around Takamatsu is a little more, you can cover more territory, especially if you use trains and buses. You can cover a lot more territory. If you're going to do walking, it's also maybe a little bit easier and flatter. Kochi's very mountainous, and craggy coastlines and really difficult. But it's also wild and woolly and very very scenic.
Mm.
Some of my best memories are from Kochi, even though it was very difficult.
Mhm.
But yeah, 2 weeks. I would zoom in on Kagawa around Takamatsu, and then resume again later at another date. Do another 2 weeks worth at another time. Do Kochi next or something. Because a lot of people don't do them in order. I didn't. Over the course of 20 years, a little bit here and a little bit there, and I finally made it all the way. But I didn't do it starting with number one.
Do you think you'll go back and do it in the full loop at some point?
Myself?
Yeah.
Probably not. No. I'm getting it's photographic equipment is heavy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, just walking, but carrying all this gear, it was just difficult. Even on a motorbike, and then getting off the motorbike, parking it, and then walking up the hill was difficult. So I don't think I could manage it.
Do people carry backpacks and things around, or
Oh, yeah.
where do they put their stuff?
They carry them when
do
they're
they?
out.
Yeah.
A lot of times, people will dump them by the little rest area. If there's a little bench,
Mhm.
because nobody's going to steal it.
Mm.
And then they do their ablutions and leave off their name tag and all that, and say their prayers or whatever, and then come back and have a little sit down and a bottle of water, and then move on. And sometimes there are little places to stay, not necessarily temple stays, but so-called henro houses, temple pilgrim accommodations, and it's like 3,000 yen a night, 3,000 or 4,000 yen per night, which is $30 or $40. So it's quite reasonable. And sometimes they're sort of near a cluster of temples, so people will drop off their gear at the henro house and then walk onto the temple from there, and then they can move a lot faster and more easily without carrying a bunch of stuff with them. I think that's popular as well.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's been fascinating. You've inspired a lot of people. There are lots of interesting comments in the chat, and Don and Richard, thank you very much for answering other people's questions in the chat. That's been really helpful.
That's very helpful. Oh, Don knows a lot more than I do. So Don's the person to ask, because Don's the one who taught me about half of this stuff. So he's the guy to ask. He's the guy he knows.
But yeah.
I'm just the photographer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time this evening for you, and good luck with the book, and hope to meet you maybe in Japan one day. We will come and ask you for your advice.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, John.
That'd be great. Thanks for inviting me.
Have a good evening.
You too.